Louis? Louis, what are you doing?
10 truly scary, dark, and intense zombie movies that got the basics right. While creatures like werewolves and vampires enjoyed respect among filmmakers and viewers, zombies were largely left out, and they joined the party only after 1968. What George A. Romero started in 1968 with his groundbreaking film Night of the Living Dead continues till today in films like Zack Snyder's latest zombie film Army of the Dead. Films like John Carpenter's Halloween, Sean S. Cunningham's Friday the 13th, and Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street have clear indication of their influence from Romero's genre-defining work.
If Judy would come downstairs for a few minutes, Harry and I could come upstairs.
In the meantime, the genre was kept alive in various films with intelligent twists by several filmmakers over the period of time. Filmmakers like Dan O'Bannon, Fred Dekker, and Stuart Gordon toyed with the zombies and painted the films with their own cinematic colors. However, the genre soon went out of fashion as every second horror film began to star hordes of flesh-eating, brain-sucking, and bloodthirsty zombies. With the beginning of the new millennium, films like Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later and Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead redefined the genre once again.
Say something.
And many started calling these films modern zombie films. The zombies once again spread like a fortunate infection across countries, and various independent filmmakers started to go beyond the conventions of a classic horror zombie film to explore and expand the concept. Comedies like Shaun of the Dead and Pontypool earned recognition. Foreign films like Wreck and the Horde found appreciation beyond their countries of origin, with clever twists like DNA mutation shown in films like Mulberry Street. However, this explosion of zombie films in the past 4 decades leads to the paradox of choices. We have so many choices that we don't know which ones to go for. Therefore, Marvelous Videos thought of helping you loyal friends, and we came up with the 10 greatest zombie flicks that are high on quality with pitch-dark story and intense atmosphere and genuinely spine-chilling scenes. So shut the doors and windows and get under your blankets because the next few minutes are going to be frightening and enlightening. Before we go into our list, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click from you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you. Let's begin. Wreck, 2007. Reporter Angela Vidal and her cameraman Pablo cover a Barcelonian fire station at night for their TV documentary series named While You're Sleeping. The fire station gets a call about an older woman trapped in her apartment and screaming. Angela and Pablo accompany firefighters Alex and Manu to the building and follow them to the old woman's apartment. As they approached, the woman attacked and bit the ear of a police officer who was there to keep an eye. When Manu and the others bring the injured officer downstairs, they find that the building has been sealed and quarantined by cops and the military.
To take charge of the situation. Thank you for your cooperation.
All the residents had gathered in the lobby. The older lady threw Alex over the staircase railing before killing another girl. Another officer named Sergio, who was present at the scene, shot the older lady dead. Angela and Pablo start questioning the residents and find a sick girl named Jennifer whose dog Max was with a vet due to an inexplicable disease.
And why isn't he here?
Because we took him to the vet.
As the people begin to panic, a government health inspector in a hazmat suit arrived to inspect the injured and diseased. But Jennifer turned violent and fled upstairs after biting her mother, and a few others also turned hostile. These people were locked in the building's warehouse. The health inspector revealed that the government found a rare form of rabies in a dog tracked to the building they were standing in. Meanwhile, the infected break out from the warehouse.
Get out of here! They bit me!
It's a 2007 Spanish found-footage horror film. Writers and directors Jaume Balaguero and Paco Plaza made this highly acclaimed horror flick, and its core strength is that it is not glossy or predictable. Its handheld style of cinematography gives a grim sense of conviction and radiates horror. Throughout the runtime, we see that the camera person filming the events knows where to look, but by the time they focus the camera on the subject, it's too late and someone is dead or something terrible has happened. The film revolves around a virus and in the end takes the most unexpected turn towards the supernatural realm, but the suspense keeps you on the edge of your seats till the very last minute.
What the fuck is he talking about, Pablo?
What plays very well for the film are the themes of claustrophobia and captivity. The characters are forced to stay with the devil because the army and police have locked them down. Trying to move out would bring a bullet, and remaining inside means awaiting a gruesome death. Films like Wreck prove that one can make a surprisingly scary zombie flick without shouting that it's a zombie flick and without painting the screens red with blood. The Dead, 2010. Lieutenant Brian Murphy, a United States Air Force engineer, was on a survivor plane out of Africa when the plane crashed somewhere at the West African coast. The previous night, zombies ravaged many areas in the vicinity, and the threat of the attack looms large on Brian. Post the crash, Brian salvaged whatever resources he could find from the damaged plane and headed on foot to find safety. Upon spotting a broken-down truck, he fixed it and drove off, only to get stuck in a pothole. As hordes of zombies were closing in, he was saved by a local soldier named Daniel. His wife was killed by the zombies the previous night, and his son ended up as a survivor in a military camp a few hundred miles away. Daniel promised to escort Brian to the nearest airport in return for the truck, which he would use to reach his son at the military camp. The men agree on the deal, but the journey to the airport remained fruitless. The two of them decided to stick together and watch each other's backs while they traveled to the military camp, which now was their common destination. The journey was a long one, and it was unsafe to travel by night. So they made base camp at a local village that was converted into a small safe house for survivors and was guarded by the local soldiers. The next day, they begin their arduous journey, but their truck gets into an accident and they're forced to travel on foot. And of course, they are now more vulnerable to the crazed zombies. While sleeping by a fire, a zombie horde attacked them in the dead of night. Although they survived, Daniel succumbed to injuries, and just before dying, he left the huge responsibility of finding his son upon Brian's shoulders. Brian now needed to finish the last leg on his long journey on foot and take care of his undertaken responsibility. Will he survive? Like the vast and ruthless setting of African landscapes, this film by Howard J. Ford, Jonathan Ford, puts you in a space where you can't do anything but pray for the characters. Unlike many horror films, this one has a moral seriousness, and it only helps in relating with the characters of Rob Freeman as Lieutenant Brian Murphy and Prince David Osei as Sergeant Daniel Dembele on an emotional level. Furthermore, the zombies in the film are depicted as a relentless force of destruction, something like time itself. There's no way to stop them or find a cure against them, and all one could do is run away as far as possible and hope to never face them again. At its worst, The Dead is a film that can be discarded as a zombie flick that got overwhelmed in its own setting and metaphors of African violence. At its best, it can be hailed as a modern zombie film that brings back memories and the cinematic style of Sergio Leone and his spaghetti western genre with long, wide shots. The film had a sequel, The Dead 2: India, but it lacks superbly on the acting front. Rammbock, Berlin Undead, 2010. A friend of Michael drops him at an apartment complex. He goes up to his girlfriend Gabby's apartment but finds a plumber and his assistant Harper instead. Michael asks for his girlfriend's whereabouts, but the men seem to know nothing about it.
Chef, was ist denn los?
Suddenly, the senior plumber goes into spasms and attacks the two other men. Harper and Michael manage to escape him and barricade themselves in the apartment. Outside the window and in the courtyard, they find people clawing, mauling, and killing each other in a state of zombie-like frenzy. They turn on the TV to learn that the city is experiencing what can only be described as a zombie apocalypse. When the television goes out, they turn to the radio to know more about the situation. All this time, Michael is wondering about his girlfriend and what state she must be in. The two men try and make contact with the other residents of the apartment who have survived. All the residents come together and act as a team in this moment of peril. It is learned that the incubation period of the virus can be extended by using sedatives, and the infected themselves are sensitive to harsh light. Michael uses his engineering skills and knowledge of spatial geometry to construct a makeshift bicycle cart with electronical flashes fit in it. The intent is to reach a rowing boat and finally to a larger vessel in the open waters, a place that's supposedly safe from the infection. Even if Michael makes it to the destination, will he find his beloved? This 2010 German horror film, directed by Marvin Kren and written by Benjamin Hessler, excels because of its short runtime of just over 60 minutes, and secondly because of how it makes you think than what it shows you. The bittersweet love affair between Michael and Gabby tends to ask one simple question: how far can one go in love? So, despite being a zombie flick and impressing many horror films across the world, the film also pleases the average movie buff. The gore in the film is only so much that it serves the purpose and doesn't blow up in your faces, and yet the fright quotient is evidently high because of the atmosphere set by Marvin Kren's vision and camera placement. Despite having the staple melancholic and pessimistic undertone, Rammbock doesn't restrict itself to the limits set by a conventional horror film. It delves into the character study and the intricate relationship that people share when they need to work together to keep their heads and hopes high in a situation of absolute despair. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. Siblings Barbara and Johnny were visiting their father's grave in a cemetery in rural Pennsylvania. As they leave the cemetery after paying homage to their dead father, an undead older man attacks the siblings, killing Johnny. Barbara runs for her life into a nearby farmhouse where she finds a dead and half-eaten woman. With nowhere to go as the undead ghouls begin to gather around the farmhouse, Barbara finds herself in a tight spot. But to her relief and delight, a man named Ben arrived out of the blue and scared away the cannibalistic intruders with fire and his lever-action rifle. Although saved, she went into a troubled mental state and displayed abnormal and disturbing behavior and movement. Then, Barbara discovers that there were others taking shelter at the farmhouse. Harry Cooper had come with his wife Helen and young daughter Karen. The hungry monsters had attacked the family in their car and bit Karen, who is now seriously ill. Judy and her boyfriend Tom had arrived for similar reasons. As Tom was trying to help Ben secure the house, Harry seemed to be more pessimistic and chose to stay in the cellar with Karen and Helen. Meanwhile, the monsters continue to besiege the farmhouse in ever-increasing numbers. The survivors learn through radio and television that the east coast of the United States has been plagued with hordes of cannibalistic, reanimating corpses. And the only silver lining is that there are posses of armed men and cops who are out there hunting these beasts. Ben started to lead the group and decided that they should salvage medical supplies for Karen and leave for a rescue shelter on his truck. Ben, Tom, and Judy leave for the gas station to refuel the truck, but things took an ugly turn when the fuel spilled and the truck exploded by catching fire from the torches and Molotov cocktails they were using to ward off the undead. Tom and Judy's bodies become the latest meal for the monsters, and Ben rushes back to the house only to find out that Karen is transformed into a cannibalistic undead. It's now up to Barbara and Ben to survive the night and wait for an armed posse to rescue them. This film is by far the daddy of all modern zombie films, and naturally, it earned more than 263 times its production budget, making it one of the most profitable ventures in the history of Hollywood. Initially criticized for its over-the-top gore, it became a cult classic in later times, and even critics lauded the film as a masterpiece in the horror genre. Media outlets such as Empire, The New York Times, and Total Film have included George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead in their lists of greatest films ever made. A series of factors make the film such a great success. Romero's zombies were dubbed as ghouls instead of zombies, yet their portrayal as reanimated, cannibalistic beings redefined the future of zombies in films. The guerrilla filmmaking techniques elevated the sumptuous gore because the shots were hasty and quick. It added a sense of rush and tension. The horror was real in scenes where the zombies eat flesh out of people's bones, and there's the classic scene of the young Karen feeding off of her father's corpse. Furthermore, the film successfully maintains a tense and eerie atmosphere by keeping its characters trapped in the dingy old farmhouse. And finally, it ends in the most nihilistic of endings, leaving the audience to drown in despair.
Why?
Clive Barker's The Plague, 2006. In a strange turn of events, the children of the world under the age of 9 go into a catatonic state with a lack of movement and communication, and they also develop agitation, confusion, and restlessness. This event threw the parents into a state of turmoil, and hospitals were overwhelmed with unconscious children. In the next 10 years, every newborn child had catatonia, while other children developed superhuman strength and seizures twice a day. In 1993, all the unconscious children woke up at once and were headstrong on killing all the adults of the world. To make things worse, they had a collective mind. So if one child learned something, the other learned it automatically. The murderous children blocked roads to stop the adults from escaping, but things got out of control when they learned how to use firearms. If the adults don't devise and execute a plan to stop them, the world would be bereft of any adults, only to be ruled by frenzied young minds. Ezekiel 5:17 reads, "I will send famine and wild beasts against you, and they will leave you childless. Plague and bloodshed will sweep through you, and I will bring the sword against you. I, the Lord, have spoken." The story builds itself on these words of the Bible and lives and breathes in them. Director Hal Masonberg did a fairly decent job of keeping the forward momentum high for most of the film. However, the ending could have been better than an awkward halt. For a film that pits children against adults in a supernatural atmosphere, Clive Barker's The Plague is a fairly fresh take, and it feels like a grandma's recipe cooked by your young spouse. What we're saying is that we don't see children as the source of evil or as a threat unless we're watching films like Orphan or the 2019 film Brightburn. Now, The Plague takes these kids, not just one but thousands of them, and turns them into the devil's undead minions. The thought itself is frightening, but what strikes the viewer even more is that these children are not even undead or reanimated. They were in a catatonic or coma-like state for 10 years, and all of them suddenly woke up with the intent of wiping all the adults off the face of the earth. The film could have been crafted in a better fashion with more thought towards acting and screenplay, but as a zombie film for DVD, it's a triumph. The Horde, 2009. A group of elite French policemen embarks on a mission of vengeance after a notorious drug dealer kills a colleague. The drug dealer and his violent men are holed up in a condemned high-rise building in the heart of a corrupt and criminal neighborhood of Paris. In an attempt to take him down and bring him to justice, they storm into a residential complex, but are captured and brought to the drug dealer. However, things take an unexpected turn when an even bigger enemy in the form of a horde of zombies attacks the opposing sides. What can only be described as the most unusual of alliances, cops and criminals will have to work together and trust in each other if any of them wish to leave the building alive. Co-written and directed by Yannick Dehaan and Benjamin Rocher, The Horde is a thrilling action horror film. A premise like this, where elite cops join hands with violent criminals, is bound to make a great film, given the action sequences are well choreographed. Now, if one adds zombies into the picture, what comes out is an hour or two of pure bliss and satisfaction. Directors Dehaan and Rocher have filled the film with axes, guns, extremely elegant hand-to-hand combat, and loads of badass attitude. The film starts off a bit slow, but soon it picks up the rhythm and maintains it, and all that follows is an eager, desperate struggle to escape. The strongest acting performances were given by Claude Perron as Aurori, the badass female cop who loathes the idea of working with a criminal scum she came to hunt, Jean-Pierre Martins as Oussem, the cop who made the reckless but obvious decision, and Eric Ubaini as Adewale Marcoudi, the drug dealer. But acting is not the strongest front of the Horde. It's a masterpiece of violence, bullets, and bloodthirsty zombies who don't care which side their victim is on. Having said that, apart from the gripping premise, The Horde doesn't add anything else to the genre, and it could be a fun watch for a Saturday night if you have no other plans. Dawn of the Dead, 2004. A Milwaukee County Hospital nurse, Anna, spends the night with her husband and misses a critical news bulletin. The following morning, a girl from their neighborhood enters the house and kills Louis. He quickly reanimates and transforms into a murderous zombie, so Anna panics and leaves in her car. She then joins Police Sergeant Kenneth Hall, Michael, small-time criminal Andre, and his pregnant wife Luda. All of them break into a mall for survival, and they first disperse to secure the mall's exits and entrances. From the roof of the mall, they see another survivor named Andy trapped in his gun store. A television broadcast shows cops burning the corpses of zombies, and instructions are given to the viewers that shooting the zombies in the head kills them quickly.
I understand you're having a difficult time killing these things, Sheriff.
Just shoot them in the head.
They spend the night in fear and keep a constant vigil on the zombies and the evolving situation, and the next day, a truck full of survivors arrives at the mall. Even in these grim and fatal circumstances, Anna and Michael and Nicole and Terry find opportunities to develop romantic feelings. Meanwhile, zombies kill Bart, and a pregnant Luda had fully transformed into a zombie. She seemingly dies before giving birth, but reanimates and is killed by one of the survivors. However, to everyone's surprise, Andre reveals a zombie baby. Strangely, Luda gave birth to the zombie baby after death. The group realizes that staying in the mall will only result in more deaths, and they resolve to fight their way to the marina and use Steve's yacht to travel to a Lake Michigan island. The film is a remake of George A. Romero's 1978 film Dawn of the Dead. Remakes always imitate and rarely duplicate their original work, and what's even more rare is for a remake to surpass the glory of its source.
I'm sorry, brother.
Directed by Zack Snyder and written by James Gunn, Dawn of the Dead is a definite masterpiece of zombie flicks and one of the greatest horror films ever made. The sheer presence of Hollywood's alpha geeks like Snyder and Gunn shout about the fact that the film was going to be a massive success, both commercially and critically. The film starts on a grim and tense note, but halfway into it, it ceases to be delightfully scary and transforms into a terrifying piece of cinematic marvel. The kill count of the film is pretty hefty, but no matter who kills whom, the deaths are criminally classy. Romero's film focused more on the mall and acted as a satire on the consumer culture of America, but Snyder and Gunn used the mall as a setting to fit in action sequences wherever necessary.
You gotta drive faster, man.
This way, as an action horror, it served more purpose than Romero's work. Having said that, it's not that this film lacks depth. Gunn essentially wrote the script with redemption as the primary theme. It's about a group of people who lived a certain life in the past and learned certain skills that define them, but they lost everything from their churches and families to their jobs and futures. They start afresh and redeem themselves as good humans by helping others in a moment of crisis. And the few who didn't walk this path, well, let's just say they got what they deserved. It's hard to believe that this was Snyder's directorial debut, but well, the man would go on to give hits like 300, Man of Steel, Justice League, and the latest being Army of the Dead. With his latest film, Zack went to the basics and has included several Easter eggs from his previous films like Dawn of the Dead. For instance, watch out for the zombie baby.
Grant, run! Run now!
Grant, run now!
Pontypool, 2008. Grant Mazzy works as a radio announcer in the small Canadian town of Pontypool, but his style of reporting includes heavy sarcasm and rhetoric, and it constantly irritates his assistant Laurel and his station manager Sydney.
Lose the story, Grant. We're going to Ken Loney. We're going to the Sunshine Chopper.
Ken Loney, who serves as the helicopter reporter, calls in to report a riot that has resulted in several deaths, and that the rioters were trying to eat each other and even themselves. Ken takes refuge in a silo but is attacked by the crazed rioters, and Ken's call gets interrupted by a radio broadcast in French. Laurel translates the transmission, which instructed not to use terms that reflect endearment, the English language, rhetorical discourse, and of course to stay indoors. Not before long, Laurel started showing a disturbed mental state and kept repeating the word missing, and Sydney and Grant locked themselves in the sound booth.
I don't miss Mr. Massey. I'm not missing anymore, Sydney.
One Dr. Mendez breaks into the radio station and takes refuge with Grant and Sydney, and he hypothesizes that Pontypool is under a virus outbreak, but the virus only triggers when terms of endearment or certain words of the English language are spoken. As they talk, Laurel vomits blood and succumbs to the virus, meaning that if the infected fail to find another host, they die. Soon, the horde of cannibalistic, or shall we say linguistic, zombies break into the radio station, and the only way to survive them is to speak carefully. The film is based on the novel Pontypool Changes Everything, written by Tony Burgess. Pontypool is by far the freshest take of the zombie subgenre. Blending humor with horror is no mean feat, and Pontypool successfully tightens your throat in fear, but the very next scene loosens it up with a burst of laughter. Upon watching the film, you realize that the infection takes place in 3 stages. First, a word expressing endearment gets stuck in someone's head, and they relentlessly repeat it. Second, their speech and sentences become scrambled, and they fail to express themselves clearly. These disabilities take a toll on the infected to lead them into their final stage when they become violent and try to chew into the mouth of their victims as if that would help them express what they feel. Director Bruce McDonald described the infected as conversationalists instead of zombies. However, unlike other films of its kind, most of the action in Pontypool takes place in enclosed spaces, which adds to the thrill and suspense quotient. Furthermore, its witty dialogues and wordplay would continue to bite you even after the credits roll. Pontypool is an intensely crafted film with a fresh take on zombie horror movies, and a direct sequel named Pontypool Changes Everything is in development. "28 Days Later," 2002. A few environmentalists break into a research facility in Cambridge to free chimpanzees. They ignore the warning that the chimps are infected with an extremely contagious virus, only known as rage.
Fucking muscle.
The chimps are infected.
The virus makes its host go violent by inducing rage. A baby chimp bites and infects a woman, who in turn attacks and infects all the other activists. 28 days later, a bicycle courier named Jim woke up from a coma at St. Thomas's Hospital in London, but found the hospital as well as the city entirely empty and abandoned, with biohazard signs placed all over the city. The infected find and chase him, but he's saved by Selena and Mark, who use a makeshift Molotov cocktail on the infected. The savior couple takes Jim to their hideout in an underground station. Later, they head to Jim's parents' house, where Mark gets infected and is put down by Selena. Selena and Jim meet a cab driver named Frank and his daughter Hannah. Frank tells them about a radio broadcast that asked survivors to reach a military outpost and containment zone outside Manchester for safety. However, the military has its own nefarious plans.
Meet Mela.
Danny Boyle's directorial talents were much appreciated and acknowledged after the release of 28 Days Later. The film presents itself as an eerie, stark, relentless fable about the undead in London. Much of the success comes from a well-researched and diligent script that Alex Garland wrote. Garland and Boyle didn't wish to make the film a zombie flick per se. If you will have noticed, we didn't mention the word zombie anywhere in the synopsis, and it's just because Boyle himself never saw the infected as zombies. So the undead and violent nature of the film's zombies are actually the results of a highly infectious virus like Ebola or the novel coronavirus. Garland and Boyle did extensive research about Ebola, and the symptoms of the film's virus are the same as Ebola's. So they tapped into the fear of humans towards infectious diseases instead of the brain-eating nature of zombies. Secondly, the post-apocalyptic London was also based on real-life situations such as the social unrest in Rwanda and Sierra Leone. A well-researched film tends to leave a mark on the viewers. Danny Boyle employed various techniques to ensure that the viewers felt the dread of the characters. Throughout the film, one may notice that hope and despair follow each other in a sequence. Ultimately, it's the realism of the film that provides the slashing gravity. For the film, they actually blew up the Canary Wharf petrol station. The film redefined the way zombie flicks were made, and it employed designs of chaos and anarchy where the society is left at the mercy of a few fringe groups with guns and power. With an average level of gore and optimum level of suspense and efficient acting by the likes of Cillian Murphy, Brendan Gleeson, and Naomi Harris, 28 Days Later is one of the best horror flicks of the 2000s.
If you guys enjoyed this video, give us a like, subscribe, and press that bell icon that will help you get notifications. We upload an awesome video every day. Have an amazing day ahead and stay safe.